Hey, what's going on, guys? Hope y'all doing all right today. Appreciate y'all heading back to the channel. It's good to see y'all this morning. Today we're going to put together a deer for a man that I've met a couple of times. Really nice guy. His name's Captain Stephen Franklin. Y'all may better know him as Bama Saltwater on YouTube and on Facebook. Really cool guy. I've had the chance to meet him a couple of times and talk to him a little while. And I've always loved his content. He's a heck of a fisherman. If y'all like watching fishing videos, he catches some hammers. Does it by himself most of the time on a single engine center console. And the size fish and the distance he runs off the coast and stuff is incredible for what he's able to get done by himself. But today, what we're going to do, he's killed this 6-point right here. And this buck is his first deer ever, which I think is freaking awesome. There ain't nothing better to me than to see somebody that knows how to hunt and how to fish. That's just, to me, the definition of a true outdoorsman. Now, if you don't like hunting or don't like fishing and you do the other, that's okay too. But when somebody can do both and can be successful at both, that right there is a true accomplishment in my book. We're going to get started on this thing. I'm just going to video me putting it together. And I've also had a few questions about smaller bodied deer. Like this deer right here, this is a 17. This is an SSR 17 from Ben Mears Taxidermy Supply. So this deer is 17 inches around right here. Going to be close to 19 at his full girth. It's got about a 6 3/4 inch nose. So while I'm putting this thing together, I'm going to give y'all a few pointers of how to make a smaller bodied deer look as impressive as a bigger bodied deer. As far as detail, as far as symmetry, there's a few little subtle differences that'll make the deer look a whole lot better than if you try to do it, say, exactly the same way you would on a 225-pound giant. So anyway, guys, let's get started. Now, first off, you really want to make sure that you pay attention to your eye size. On some of these forms, they call for a 30 millimeter or 28 millimeter. This form right here calls for a 32. So even though you're using a smaller form, these 32 eyes are going to look way better than if you try to put a small eye on a form that calls for a bigger eye. See that right there? Looks just right. I've noticed on some of these forms that when they call for the smaller eye size, usually it's because the eye is not inset quite as far. So when you use the smaller eye, you still have almost the same amount of glass coming out from the face. So it really is, it looks the same as this size eye, but this one is inset more. So like I said, you're still gonna have the same amount of glass showing. A lot of people make the mistake, you'll see this if you pay attention to some smaller bodied deer, a lot of people make the mistake of going so small on the eyes that it makes them look really beady, like it looks like a little bitty, like a rabbit eye or something. And if you notice on like a fawn, if you look at just a really small deer, or any baby animal really, they almost look bug-eyed. You know, they're all eyes and almost no face. And they're, you know, they've got large eyes, you know, even when they're young. So you want to make sure that right there stays consistent. I'm going to show you all this before I set these antlers. Up here on top of this head, you see where the antlers sit, where that skull cap comes right up flush with the top of that form. Now on a form like this, you can see how narrow the face is and where the top of that skull cap is at. Well, on a larger form, you'll see how in here he starts to get a dent in his head. People sometimes refer to that as a dent. They get so old, they get a big old dent in their head. Well, their skull doesn't actually sink. It's everything else grows up around it. So I'm sure that everybody, y'all probably know somebody that's been on steroids or been on testosterone, or just look on any bodybuilding competition or anything, and you'll see those guys, how their face, even their jaw muscle here, the bottom of their neck right here, this muscle, it'll be protruding, it'll be bulged out. Even sometimes their eyebrows will do the same thing. It's no different with a deer. When a deer is in full rut, especially, they start blowing up, all that is testosterone. So even though we look at it as a big swollen neck, well, it's not just the neck muscle. Every muscle in that whole deer is swollen, and that's what happens when you start getting these big, huge eye ridges and eyelids, and that protrusion in those big, swelled up, full swell forms. Now, an older buck will also have a bigger bone structure, so he'll start to have his eyebrow, some of those eye sockets stuff will get so big It also changes the way they look too. But if you ever look at a summertime deer, for instance, like a deer that's killed really early season or like a velvet buck in August, their face will be long because they'll be an old deer, but they still have got that narrow, shrunk down look in their face. They don't have those big eye, features like they would on a buck, that was in full rut. So it's very similar to a young deer. A young deer and an early season mature deer are going to have very, very similar facial features, very similar neck features. So the key is, do not build up the eyes too big. Don't use too small of a glass eye in there. And then when you do your rack, make sure that rack is up high enough to be even with the top of that form. If you cut it down too far, what it's going to do is your antler is going to come down a little bit too low. And rather than have that narrow, tall look on the top of that head, you're going to end up with a flatter head, and it's going to make it try to look wide right here, which is not going to be correct. And in a younger buck, that head seems to stick up higher because you just don't have as much meat coming up around the bases of those antlers. I'll show y'all again, once I get the antlers on there, I'll kind of compare to some of the other deer in here and kind of show y'all again what I'm talking about once we've got all that put together. Now that I've got him roughed in, I slid him over here next to this big mature deer. It's got a really huge form. And I'm going to show y'all side by side some of the differences and similarities, how y'all can make this look good. All right, on this big deer, you can see how big and wide and flat that head is. It looks like his eyes are coming way out past his antler here. And proportionally, that's correct. Well, on the smaller deer, you can see here, it's just about the same angle from the base to that eye. The difference is you've got such a narrow spot up here. What I like to do on these deer, you can see on these big mature bucks, they got this big brow ridge, a lot more musculature, a lot more skin. I mean, just a lot more of everything. Whereas on these, it's a little bit thinner here, but I also like to make a good transition between here, make it a little bit thinner before it steps up onto that skull cap right there. You can see how the skull cap comes right up in between those eyes. Whereas on this one, it's more like a big, round, flat head, almost like a bull. Now the ears on this one, those are small ear liners. These are mediums. proportionally, they look basically the same. But if you try to use too large of an ear liner, number one, you're going to have problems with drumming. The inside of this ear, usually on a smaller ear, is not going to want to stay cupped inside of that ear liner. Now, two, look at how the eyes turned out. See how small the eyes almost look on this buck compared to his head. And these are 32 millimeter eyes. Okay, these are also 32 millimeter eyes. That's the same size eye. But you can see how that buck right there, I mean, when it looks at you, it looks like he's looking at you. And if you used a small eye because it's a smaller body deer, what's going to happen is it's just not going to look like a deer. That's what a young deer looks like. Make sure to pay special attention too to your muscle detail. The smaller forms don't have quite as much muscle cut into them as the larger forms, but they do still have muscle. They do still have some wrinkles. So make sure as that thing dries up, you keep all those things tucked real well. As y'all can see, that deer out there makes for a fine mount. And it's going to make a great display on the wall. If y'all hadn't already, y'all go check out Bama Saltwater on YouTube and Facebook. He obviously is now a supporter of my taxidermy shop. He supports my channel. So I'm going to support him. Guys, y'all stay safe. God bless y'all. We'll see y'all in the next video.